I'm Tracy Osborne, and you're listening to the Daring Woman podcast. Imagine the story of a generation being altered by women who were empowered to live their truth and in turn can empower others to live theirs. It's time to rewrite the narrative. You know, pregnancy and motherhood is supposed to be one of those magical times for women. It's we're our bodies are changing, we're growing somebody inside of us. It's just supposed to be full of nothing but wonder and bliss. But unfortunately for so many women, that's not the case. And not only is it hard for some to get pregnant, my daughter, for example, has polycystic ovarian syndrome, and if she gets pregnant, it will definitely be a miracle baby for sure. And there's a lot of women out there like that. So my guest today, Cathy McKinnon, completely understands not only the struggles of getting pregnant, but then some issues and whatnot of explosive divorce shortly after the baby was born. I mean, who wants to go through that? You just pushed a baby out of your hoo-hoo, Cathy, thank you so much for joining us and coming on to tell us your story today.
Thank you for having me.
So you actually, you went through years of fertility struggles, right?
I did. So I could get pregnant, but I could not maintain the pregnancy. So I had 5 miscarriages before I had my son.
Wow.
And it was very, very frustrating and agonizing because there was no definitive answer as to why this was happening. And I'm a very logical person, and I just thought if they could just tell me what was wrong, I could fix it and we can move forward.
Right.
But after doctor's visits, this continued to happen. I would get very excited I was pregnant, and then obviously the disappointment and sadness shortly thereafter, time after time. And so when I was pregnant with my son, it was 9 months of anxiety, really, because I was waiting for something to happen.
Sure. Yeah. I had 2 miscarriages before I had baby number 3. There was a huge gap in age between number 2 and number 3. And, it's devastating. It is absolutely devastating. So I completely can understand the pain and frustration. And, my daughter, she got pregnant and was just super excited and then lost it. And was just absolutely crushed, So you ended up just going through the fertility specialist and getting pregnant that way?
Yeah, so I ended up doing a few rounds of fertility treatments, injecting myself with the lovely drugs. It's, a blessing and a curse. They gave me my son at the end of the day, but they're quite a roller coaster of emotions and hormones and doctor's visits and treatments. So yeah, we were able to conceive, and then I was able to carry my son full term. And actually, he was so stubborn I had to be induced. So he was for sure a healthy baby because he wasn't ready to come out. But I'm very blessed to have him. I call him my miracle baby. And I look back now, and it was truly him and my desire to have him that I say saved me. And I say that because in between all of my miscarriages and going from doctor to doctor to try and understand what was happening, why it was happening, and I wanted an answer. I just wanted whatever it was, I just needed an answer, good, bad, or indifferent. And so in this haste of going to doctor, one of the doctors, in a complete fluke in one of the checkups, actually felt a tumor on my thyroid. And so that set off a whole trigger of different doctor's appointments. But the reality is, what she found by complete fluke was cancer.
Wow.
And so, God bless her, thank her for finding that, because I had no symptoms. And so it could have been years before another doctor or even I knew about it. And at that point, the cancer could have spread so much more dramatically. And so really, I thank my son and the desire to have him that pushed me to really search for that answer and go to that doctor that found this.
Wow. Oh my gosh, what a roller coaster you were on. And it didn't stop in the delivery room, did it?
It did not. It did not. What was supposed to be kind of, the happiest time of my life, I finally have this baby that I've been trying to have for years and putting myself, through physical and mental anguish to have this baby. Shortly thereafter, my partner at the time turned to alcohol to cope. And, it became very explosive in our household. And, his anger and rage, in addition to me trying to raise a baby and work full time, it was just a bad combination of sorts.
Wow. So how did you get through it?
That's the magic question. And when somebody asked me that a month or so ago, the only word that came to my mind immediately was the word grit. I essentially just buckled down and did what I had to do, what I knew I had to do to get my son and I to a safe, calm place, a place where I wanted us to be in terms of our lives and how I would raise him. And it wasn't pretty. It wasn't fun. It was a lot of exhaustion, a lot of tears, a lot of frustrations. But now on the flip side, it was definitely worth it.
So when you were going through the struggles, can you tell us a little bit more about what that was like? How grit is definitely something that you have to get through such a roller coaster of crap that you were kind of dealt, But
that is a good way to describe it.
What else did you have a support system? Did you have friends and family, or were you on your own?
And really I was on my own. Not that I don't have friends or I don't have family nearby here, but I took all of that and I internalized it. And I didn't tell anybody what was going on within the four walls of our house until after my partner had moved out. I didn't, tell anyone what was going on with the miscarriages until after my son was born. And I said, this was a long time coming. At the time, I put it all on myself. And at the time, I thought I was a failure, that I had done something wrong, both in terms of the fertility struggles and, my marriage exploding, that everybody else's expectations or views, I didn't want to deal with that kind of backlash or questioning. I just knew I had to get through it, and I couldn't deal with that feedback, good, bad, or indifferent, on top of just trying to cope and get through it. And so really it was just me pushing myself through it day after day.
Looking back at that, would you, knowing now what you know and all of that, would you have done it different? Would you have reached out and talked to people as opposed to just keeping it all inside?
Oh, absolutely. I don't recommend coping that way. And I also feel like now, when I was going through my miscarriages was almost 10 years ago. Now we're beginning to be much more open about fertility struggles.
Right.
It's much more reasonable and okay to talk about them than it was or had been in the past. And to the point where women are telling their individual stories, and that's very powerful, so women don't feel alone. And that's actually one of my upcoming projects, is I'm a co-author in a book of fertility stories, all different stories of women who are willing to say and put it out there that they had this struggle, this is how they coped, you're not alone.
That is so important, because I know what it's like, and I think as women, it's just so natural for us to try and internalize everything and take the burden and take the blame. That's just kind of in our DNA, and it's very isolating. No matter what the issue is, it can be very isolating when you do that. So I love that you're doing that project. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I think, as women, we're naturally caregivers, and so it's hard for us to receive that care back.
Hmm.
It's foreign, and so we kind of shut that out sometimes. And that's really not the best way to cope or get through these tough life situations.
It's not. Um, I mean, we think that we're superwoman and that we can do everything on our own and we don't need help. We don't need outside help. But, the fact of the matter is asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength.
It is. And being able to speak your story actually takes the weight off of you. For the
Absolutely.
last few years, I couldn't even speak all the details of my story without having anxiety attacks, to the point where like I couldn't even breathe. I was basically hyperventilating.
Sure.
And now that I can speak about it, I feel like 100 pounds lighter. I'm not carrying all this weight and emotion anymore. I've let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not, you're absolutely, you're not internalizing it anymore. So you're just kind of putting it out to the universe or whatever, the atmosphere, the energy, whatever you want to call it. And letting it go. It doesn't make the pain of the miscarriages or any of that any less, but it's just no longer a burden that you need to shoulder.
And I think now that I'm on the other side of it and I can talk about it, it's easier for me to see that these experiences don't define me and they don't define my future. Yes, they were part of my journey. They're part of my story. There were lessons learned from all of it, but it doesn't define me and who I'm going to be going forward.
That is so important to remember, that our past does not define who we are and who we're going to become. It may be part of it, absolutely. Our past does shape us in so many ways, but it's not who we are. It's just part of who we are.
Yeah, it's part of our journey, and that might be a
Yeah.
big part of your journey or a small part of your journey or a very impactful part of your journey, but it's not the end of the story.
No, it's just a chapter. And the nice thing about that is you can always rewrite it. I like that. I love that you're at the point now where you can share and let other women know that, hey, it's okay. You're not alone. And whatever you're going through right now, there's somebody out there who's been there and they're there to help you.
And that's the thing, reaching out, understanding that there are other women who maybe didn't have your exact circumstances, but they probably had similar circumstances. And there's so many of us out there now that had, to incur some sort of a fertility treatment or go through a miscarriage or whatever it might be, that, there's no reason to think you're alone, and there's no reason to isolate yourself and not talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, we talk about this a lot on the show and in other things that we do with Daring Woman, about talking about your story and telling your story. And, and I want to reiterate to our listeners that when we talk about, you need to be open, you need to tell your story, we're not necessarily saying you need to go public. You don't need to become a speaker and write a book or anything like that. But you need to be able to, talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your kids, just be able to talk to somebody, a therapist, anybody. You've got to get it out. Holding it in is just, it's like swallowing poison and not letting it come back out again,
Yeah, it's very toxic, and the effects that stress and anxiety can have on your body just lead you down a very unhealthy path.
Incredibly unhealthy.
But to your point, you don't have to put it on social media. You don't have to put it in a book. If that is the way that you feel you need to, speak it, so be it. Do your own thing. But the way I started was I wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
And after I initially wrote it, I didn't even share it with anybody.
Yeah.
And then I shared it with one person, and then I shared it with another person. And eventually I felt comfortable enough that I could share it with everyone.
Right.
But you're right. I didn't start out that way for sure.
No, I didn't either. I also started out by writing it. I actually wrote about my rape in a English paper for college. And that was the first time that I, put it to words, and it actually opened up a floodgate of things that I had been blocking out about that night. And I remember calling up my best friend going, "Oh my God, did you know this happened on prom night?" She goes, "Yeah, I knew, but I knew that you had blocked it out, so I wasn't going to say anything, But it was powerful just to put pen to paper.
And you'll realize, like, when you do that, like you said, the floodgates just open.
Yeah.
And most people intend to maybe just start by writing a little bit, and then once they get going, they can't stop.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that's what we encourage journaling so much with the podcast. And when I did the From Survivor to Thriver Summit, that was the resounding theme was journal, write it down, get it out, don't keep it in. And that's such a great place to start, because that's something you don't have to share with anybody. You can just write it down and file it away or burn it or whatever.
And really, that's more for you and freeing you
Mm-hmm.
of that pain or grief or emotion than anything else for anybody else.
Absolutely. So, any last recommendations and pieces of advice for women out there who may be going through the fertility struggles or the pregnancy struggles right now, and they're feeling like it's their fault, and all of that?
Yeah. My number one tip is don't take it personal. And I know that's very hard because it's your body, it's your emotions. But, the universe has a strange way of things working out at the end of the day. And I know when you're in the process, that's very hard to hear, because I didn't even want to hear that when I was in the process. But get out there, talk to people, find a doctor you love and trust. Because if you don't have this great relationship or rapport with your doctor, if you feel uncomfortable or the energy is just off, find someone that you're comfortable with, because that will make the difference in your stress level, which will make the difference in ease and being open about things and talking things through.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I know there's a ton of support groups out there, both online and offline. So definitely I would recommend searching out some support groups with other women who are going through or have been there, and can, just kind of uplift you, support you, give you advice when you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not alone in your journey. There's more and more of us.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on and, being so open and brave to share your journey with your struggles, and letting us know that, it's going to be okay. However it turns out, it's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay. And there is so much power in being able to tell your story. And again, whether it's written or oral or public or not public,
Mm-hmm.
telling your story is so powerful, and it releases you to carry on for your future.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you. And ladies, thank you as always for listening in, and we will talk to you next week on the show.